Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Seattle Angel Conference, Seattle Angels Meetup Group. Today, we're actually delighted to be able to have Mike Pritchard speak to us, and I'm going to do some introductions with him in a minute. But in the interim, I'd like to actually just say a little bit about what we're trying to do here. So Seattle Angel Conference and John Seacrest is aiming to increase the ecosystem for funding and support for new founders through an investment-driven program. We do our education sessions, which are one of them, and every Thursday, same time, come along and join us 12 to 2. We also will we are doing our investor company due diligence at the moment, and there are 5 finalists. They'll be presenting on November the 17th. And that will be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'll put the Eventbrite link in here. So if you want to see what the end result of the conference is, then come and join us there and cheer on the 5 companies that are actually presenting. The other thing that we're doing is starting up the same thing, an education program for APIS Health Angels, which is focused on the health, life sciences, startups, wellness, biotech, med device, and welcome to join us there. We're working on education sessions, which are Thursday at 5 o'clock, and that's through the Eventbrite Mossy Ventures, and I'll put the link in there. So today we want to just have an opportunity. We're talking pricing, and we're also going to get talking about Van Westendorp's price sensitivity meter. I'm going to turn it to Mike. So Mike, basically, we're super happy to have him because this is a very interesting topic for our both founder and investor group. Mike started his career in firmware and has included marketing and market research, customer support, development, and engineering for large tech and research companies, and 5 Circles Research is his company now. He's just had a move logistically closer to us, I believe, and we're happy that he's going to share some of his advice. I'll let you do the rest of the introductions.
Okay, yeah, sure. No, I'm going to do that. I'm just, I thought the clicker was working and it isn't. I'm struggling with a couple of little things here. I haven't found the projector yet. and so we're doing this from my screen, hopefully. Oh, let's try that. No, that's not doing it. Okay. Well, I want to start with, let's see if I can, can you see my screen, the main screen with the?
We can see your pricing for startups. And are you able to advance it? If you want to send it to me quickly, you could do that. Yeah,
well, I'm not sure I can send it quickly. So let me just, I don't know why that's not. Oh, there we go. Okay. Here, I'm going to come back to a little bit of the introduction part. Here are the topics that we're going to cover. Just some of the fundamentals about pricing and to get to pricing and its relationship to profitability. What we're going to do is talk about traps and mistakes that other people have made so that you can avoid them. And we're going to talk about pricing models in broad terms. And our focus is on value-based pricing. So we've got quite a few things on that. And then we'll cover some things afterwards, but the pricing questions, the Van Westendorp, both the questions, how do you ask them, and the analysis is important. Now, normally, when I do in-person presentations, I encourage interaction by bombarding people with candies. Can't do that here, but we're going to be, Elizabeth's going to check up on how people are interacting and help me at the end because there is a prize. And just to get you started, let's see. Oh gosh. Maybe the mouse will work. Okay, so you've got more background on me. Here's just a question. I took out a more general one. So this is just to get you in the tune for interaction, but it's also part of a philosophy of mine about learning from things that previous people have done. Why is doing that? Okay. So who wrote Competitive Strategy and was criticized because the world was no longer like that, and then proved right during a previous dot bomb? Raise your hand or send a chat to Elizabeth. Talk if you have the answer. I don't think
Was it Porter?
It was Porter, Michael Porter. And actually that's relevant now because of some of the things that we're going to talk about in pricing. I think this was about the time when they were just taking pot shots at him. But the important thing about at least one of the areas that he talks about is the idea that market share is really important to profitability. And I just generalize it at about 30% plus. What that means for many people is that they come in and start thinking about 2% of this giant market, and then the investor shoots them down. And that's because they haven't done their segmentation and niching properly. So that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, thank you, Jenna. Okay, clicker's not going to work, so we'll see. Okay, pricing is simple, isn't it? Well, you know, that's why we're here, because it isn't simple. This is an example that still holds good and is salutary. So if you want to chime in with some chat things or any other way, I'm just going to have to fumble with this the mouse here for a moment, unless it will do something else. No, okay. So if anybody knows this person, I would be kind of surprised with the amount of distance, but you might know the company. This is Rod Johnson, who took over JCPenney, and he said pricing is actually pretty simple and straightforward, which I disagree with, but his second sentence wasn't too bad. Customers will not pay literally a penny more than the true value of the product. What did he do wrong at JCPenney? I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds, but not very long. He didn't understand that the JCPenney customer wasn't looking for value in the sense of having a straightforward pricing. They wanted sales. That was what JCPenney was famous for. And the result of his disastrous experience was the stock market was going up, JCPenney was going down, and their big competitor Macy's was going up. So you can see the end result for him. I think he would probably prefer to be remembered for the company he was at before, even though his boss, Steve Jobs, told him he was dumb to join JCPenney. But his big claim to fame was the Apple Store, which is far away from the sales that JCPenney's was doing, right? High end. Somebody was speaking there. Was that you, Elizabeth? No. Okay. Okay, so let's just set the scene on the value base, but also it's not quite as simple as you think. You brought up some issues just a moment ago, and this is capturing what people said earlier. There are two in here that I think are more on the finance side, but you know, just a general thing about some pricing ideas and scaling. Michael, did I get the decoding of ABS correctly?
Yep, that's me.
Yeah, that's the asset-based security. You actually have an interesting thing about how you started the company, and I'm going to refer back to that. But this one and the other one about valuation, I think are probably more in the realm of the finance side, but we can do things to boost the valuation, as we'll see in the next slide. So how to price a product correctly, and I think this is you, gosh, and Alexandra. I think one of the things for you to remember is that the looking at analogies and parallels in different markets is valuable. You said something more in your introduction about the Russian side of things, and I will get to it, but it should be fairly obvious when we see it, and when you do some actual research. I think that you do not want to underprice, and that will send the wrong signal to your customers and the investors as well. I think you're aware of that from what you just said. Mm-hmm. Also, there's some secondary research, whether it's yours or parallel, that should be looked at. I think that maybe not enough people are making use of the resources at the library. I mean public libraries and academic libraries as well. I don't generally recommend buying secondary research reports because they're often just a waste of money, but the table of contents and the summary are usually well worth the money you didn't pay for it. How do you modify your pricing pictures for the different audience? And I'm trying to think who that was. Oh, Buzz isn't here, is he? That wasn't him, but Elizabeth, that was yours, I think. Different audiences. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
In the health world, there's lots of people who are buying and using and things.
I think you didn't mention investors, which that's different, but they want to see how you're pitching to somebody, and I think that these other groups, from what I can tell, if I've got the right product, you've got the thing for the paramedics and the EMS. Is that right? Yeah. I think those are the key people. You also need to understand the dynamics, which you probably do far better than I do, of the who's the influencer and who's the decision maker, etc. And the end patient, well, we're seeing different things, and we have different rules, as you're well aware, I'm sure, in the US, about what we can say and who we can communicate with. So I'm just going to assume for most of this presentation that we're talking US only, but focus on those people that are actually going to be the buyers, and then use the examples of the others as you tailor your pitches. Last one's an interesting one. How do I evaluate the entrepreneur's pricing strategies? I would say you want to know that they're actually doing their work in terms of understanding pricing, and they're acting on it. And this is a reminder to me that I'm going to give a couple of examples of people who didn't listen to the research, and products no longer exist. So it's just part of what you do as an investor is keeping them on track. I did listen to the rest of the comments, and maybe we've got this recorded so we can track those, I think. John and I are still working out some details on publishing recordings, but you will get an ability to get the slides anyway. Oops, I don't know why I'm bothering pressing that. Okay, so pricing is a competitive lever. Everybody, I think, has great respect for Warren Buffett, and he said, no, I just got to get this thing right. Okay, the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power, by which he meant the ability of a company to control the prices, and that's non-commodity. That's essentially what's inherent in that. And I think we just stepped onto the next the click here. Unfortunately, fewer than 5% of companies, big companies, have a full-time position. Fewer, slightly more, do systematic research, which means that they get help from the outside. And at the time of this, which was a while back, only 9% of business schools teach pricing. I'm going to refer to Thomas Nagel's work, and that's also accessible through my through the fundamental article that I wrote, and the things that he did with people who have come after him. But this is how you can get access to a lot more detail than this. Oh, sorry. Let's just stretch over here. This is weird. Pricing power can increase your company valuation. Well, that doesn't really answer that question, does it? But it's just the general side of things. And here, just a very brief definition. And the reason I put this up is because we sometimes get confused between cost and price, and partly that's because we've got suppliers involved and their price is your cost. Okay, now we break down the cost further, we can get to direct cost and overhead and G&A, general administration. Then what I'm going to talk about next is pricing has the greatest effect on profitability. What we're not covering in this class is things like unit economics. A lot of different business models here, so that would get confusing anyway. But you know, it's important. This is just the very simplest definition. So pricing drives profitability. Okay, what does that mean? If we looked back at the Standard & Poor's Global 1200 average statements and normalized it, this is work done by Nagel and his crew. So we normalized it and got a price of $100. This was at a time when the costs had been taken out of many products, just cut down to the minimum. So it may not be the same now, but the effect is going to be similar. So we got then a fixed cost of $20.50, a variable cost of $68, leaving a profit of $11.50, which is magically 11.5%, right? What happens if we raise the price by 1%? I want to talk a little bit later about some price raises, but 1%, probably nobody would even bother to tell you. They just send you out a new monthly statement or whatever for 1 or 2% more. The impact of that is that you've increased the price by 1%. Yes, as we said that. And the price went up to, the profit, I should say, went up to $12.50, which is an increase of 8.7% profit. Okay, I'm mixing what we're percentaging off, but we get a significant increase in profit. And now this assumes, and as I said, the costs were pretty much whittled down at this point, but it assumes that nothing else changes. With that kind of price difference, you'd expect it to not change too much. Does that make sense to anybody? Everybody, raise your hands or whatever we're doing. Okay. Now, somebody comes in, Gage, this is not you, and says, I think our prices are too high because we're getting beaten out of business, so we should lower prices, right? Ever heard that from your sales teams? Okay. And you can guess what I'm going to say by the fact that the title says "and loss." If we lower the price by 15%, I'm sorry, 5%, which is about as little as it would take to get anybody's attention, or you couldn't get anything for less than that. What happens to the amount you need to sell to just break even? Needs to go up by 17.5%. So raising prices is generally more successful in terms of profitability than lowering prices. Does that make sense? Huh? I can see you on the screen, Michael. Okay, you're nodding. So maybe we'll get to do something better. Okay, so first of the mistakes, in my opinion, a mistake. There's some debate about this one. Anybody know what this product is and whose hand is holding it? Okay, I won't torture you. This product was introduced, launched at $599. 66 days later, the price went down to $399. And yes, it was Steve Jobs introducing the first iPhone. I personally strongly believe this was a mistake. I just went back and looked at some commentary on the Apple site, at the time, I believe, and there were some strong advocates who said, no, this wasn't a mistake, but plenty of people said it was. Most people, I think, say it was. And forget the Apple has big. Well, we'll come back to Apple had deep pockets. Could your company afford to do this? Introduce a product and then lower it to 2/3 so quickly? Most people would say, no, we couldn't afford to do that. Apple actually decided to do a little bit of a trick on it, and they didn't give back people money, which might have been a possibility with it being so short a time. They gave them a discount on a future product because they were so strong advocates. And that's what they felt would be best for them. Okay, this trap is kind of relevant in some senses to all of us when we're in a competitive situation, but it's more relevant in things that are either commodities or close to commodities. And this is a real example. Figure that out. Okay. What was interesting about this is it was a small isolated town in the Midwest. And at the beginning of this little episode, the typical order for pizza was $15. Pizza Hut said, we're going to mix it up. We think we need more market share. So they offered any size, any topping for $10. And what do you think happened then? Anybody want to venture us an idea? John, maybe? Who's in? Okay. Can I do that?
So what you're saying is that they offered it $15, any size, any topping?
Well, that's what they started out. The typical order, the average selling price was $15. And then Pizza Hut said, let's make it $10. Yeah. And I won't torture you any longer. So over the next few weeks, the rest of them all chimed in. What was the net result of that? This somebody can answer. Going, gone.
Money.
What's that? They lost money?
All of them did.
Yeah. Their market share was now, their typical order was now $10. Market share was unchanged, and their profits were down. Quite right. Give a score to that person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what did they do? My guess is they kind of had to go out to the golf course and illegally say, this is ridiculous. Let's just agree to do things differently. And the airlines do that all the time, right? One way or another. They just find some way to change it. So this is not a winning proposition. Unless maybe you put one of them out of business, but that's not a good situation to be in either. Okay, this is an exercise, so I want some show of hands for two different questions. And this is a little bit relating to one of the questions you asked, Elizabeth, but not exactly. So we started out with this product, this consumer product. It happens to be what we use to make it work. This is based on some actual academic work, but we use this orange stuff that people clean their hands with for engines and cars. And the starting point was 7.5 ounces for $13.50. I don't want you to do any calculations. Don't check real prices. Don't even know what they are right now. This is just two choices that the manufacturer had of going forward. One is offering more for the same price, and the other is keeping the amount the same and lowering the price. Which would you choose? First of all, the more for the same price. Can you raise your hands and the whatever that little gizmo is? Yeah, you counting those, Elizabeth?
I got it.
Okay, and then which of you would choose the smaller, the same amount for a lower price? Raise your hands. Got it? Okay. Do any of you look at those little things on the grocery shelves that tell you how much the unit cost is? The reality is that the better deal is the discount rather than the bonus. However, I think the original title of this article was Consumers Can't Do Math. They tend to choose the bonus over the discount. What were the numbers, Elizabeth? Did you?
Well, it looks like they were 2-2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no, they're also thinking too hard. Unless people have left, and you know, this is kind of Costco's model, right? Get more, get bigger bottles, get multiple bottles. So they're playing to that. One of the original investors in Costco told me that every time he took a trip to check on his investment, he came back with giant jars of olives because he couldn't resist it. And he said, when he talked about this, he said, I think they're still there. but it worked for them. And it works for some things, right? I mean, if you buy too much of a herb, it's probably not so good. Now we're going to talk about the converse to the value-based, and I'm glad John's joined us because the comment he made the other day is relevant here. This is a real example, local company that was involved in the Boeing ecosystem, and they didn't actually make these whole big units which were baking plane wings. They built the control systems, and so it's only a little part of what you see. And why I bring up John's name is because when we asked them, they said we're cost based 3 times the cost, which was just the number you said the other day. When we dug into a little further, they had a tough time figuring out what the cost was. And that's not exactly unusual. It seems funny and laughable, but you know, they were arguing amongst themselves or whether they threw in an engineer to install it or whether they charged separately for that. Meanwhile, we were doing some research, and the customer said they're better than the competitors with a lower price. Does that sound smart? And you already saw me put that one up. Manufacturer was giving away profits. That's quite common in cost-based situations. I'm going to just sort of skip through this table to get to the end and talk about several of it. and you can refer to it later. It's also got some of it from an interview with Tim Cook. But I want to point out a couple of things. I mean, for you in the regulated world, the medicine government world, an issue is the government forces me to reveal costs. And you don't necessarily have to respond in exactly the way they ask the question. But probably a bigger trap is saying, well, I've got to do it that way for the government, and then falling into the I have to do it for everybody else. So don't use that. There is still some marketing and relationship building in selling to government, but it's certainly an actual trap. What does value mean to a prospect? And I've got a few more words on that later. But because we can't always find it, it's not always easy to describe, we sometimes fall back on taking the easy way out, cost. And then we've got those salespeople saying we're losing on price. So if we don't understand our product and our market well enough, we might be missing out because of that. Now, it's one thing if you're selling cement, pre-mixed cement, and I bring that up because that's one of the questions in the queue on my Van Westendorp price right now, article right now. But there's another part of it, which is that customers who are driven by price may be less profitable for you. For some reason, they're also the ones who are the most of pain in the butt. And they're already getting a deal, and they want to treat your products as a commodity. Different discussion, but identifying who they are and not going after them is a good idea. And this last one, which I just left bold by mistake, is about investing. And this is what Tim Cook was interviewed saying of investment for efficiency and to build the best products, as opposed to the first point here, which is that investments in people and equipment seem to penalize the seller. So take the long view of investment. And we wrote an article on this for one of the presentations. You don't have to worry about these links, you'll get them anyway, and they're visible on the website. Actually, any questions on that before we move on? Okay. In the interest of time, I'm not going to leave anything very long. So pricing approaches in general, and these are most of them apart from luxury. Survival, maybe that was in the mind of those pizza places. Cost-based, often a mistake. Value-based pricing, I'm going to show you the extremes that we look at of maximizing market share and market skimming. And then product quality leadership. I used to have BMW in here. Tesla, I have mixed feelings about Tesla because I'm not sure the quality is actually really there. For the cars, there's certainly the whole ecosystem thing. But on the other hand, you can't argue with the fact that they broke the scoring system at Consumer Reports. Nobody was supposed to get more than 100 points, so they had to redo it. Anybody ever use Drano to clean things, clean their sinks? I don't know if you can see my picture at the same time here, but this came out a few years ago. There's a product called Zip It, and it's actually, I've got a newer one, but it's been around the ring in a lot of presentations. It's never been used, and they sent out this lovely video about how yucky it was to use even their product. So Drano at the time and liquid plumber, those kind of things, we're hovering around the $5 mark. You can see this thing, the early product, it's still got the tooling marks for the packaging. And this, oh, mine's yellow, theirs is white. So there's little teeth, you know, they were sort of the biggest part of the manufacturing. It probably cost 50 cents to manufacture. What should they charge? John? Yeah.
I'll jump in for John and say, I would say at least Drano and more, since we all get recommendations to not use those chemicals on our pipes.
Yeah, now let me ask you back. Would that be different in different parts of the country?
Maybe so.
You know, Seattle, we think we're so green, right?
And I guess I'd heard that that stuff caused damage to pipes, but I might have that wrong. My plumbing knowledge low.
I heard the
It's
same
possible.
thing, Jen.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, let's just not argue about the details, but around the price of Drano, maybe a little more with those added values. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, on the other hand, they don't have the marketing clout of Drano. So maybe they need to come in a little bit lower, saying this is untried, untested, but not charging $1.50, which is 3 times cost. Charging close to $5. Does that make sense?
Well, Jerry's got an idea, $9.95, since when I need it now.
Well, yeah, that's probably why you used to turn to Drano. Does anybody know what happened in the later years to Zip It? They got bought by Drano, and you can offer, or you can buy the two together. So you can try the, you know, less nasty stuff and just have to deal with the yuck that you're pulling out of the sink, or you can buy the yeah, you can do it either way, but you've got the combination. So it worked out for them, and that's an example of basing it. It's a bit like, you know, years ago we used to say you're buying a hole, not a drill. This is buying the final result, not the thing. So bear that in mind. That's a key point here. The other way we looked at this was, this is based on some reality, but it's more just knowledge of my partner at the time of what was going on in the industrial market. So we started out with a dumb motor, and then postulated a smart motor, and we created pieces of value around that. So the smart motor was priced at $300, and you'll see what the difference between dumb and smart is here. It reduces the power costs. I mean, let's say it's got it doesn't turn on instantly, so the capacitors don't blow up, and so you don't use more power. It's also lower maintenance, and we assigned $150 to each of those, giving us, from the dumb motor, an upper bound, we felt, of the price of $600 for the added value. So now this is down to the marketing and the probably the engineer and the support team to say, okay, what can we do? And here's this value-based pricing zone, where at the top we've got skimming. And, you know, we might not be, as a new manufacturer, able to keep up with demand if we'd gone for the other end, which would be market penetration. Or do we have the money for the big bang? Not sure that that's quite the same in this industrial smart motor world. It might be more around who tells you what you're going to buy. But I think they're more likely to start off with skimming. The tech companies do this in a sort of hidden way or an obvious way with new generations of processors and phones, and then they lower the price as they go. If you've got the bigger people that have lots of money to spend on advertising, they might be more likely to do, let's just take the market over. Comments, questions on that? Okay. All right, now here's another example, and maybe it's more useful because it shows how buyers can understand value and a trap that you can fall into. This was a few years ago, but that gives us the benefit of being able to understand the history better. When incandescents and LEDs were more of a should I, shouldn't I? Now we don't have much choice. We probably still do in this particular example, which was fitting out a parking lot. But and for some specialized cases, you do still have some choices between incandescents and LEDs. And what we did was we broke the effective cost to the purchaser into the purchase price, and LEDs were more expensive than incandescents. They still are for the cases where you can get both. But of course, the manufacturers say they're going to last for 20 years, which most people don't really think is, it's you know, it's a little bit too optimistic. But in this case, they took 5 years as a to be able to evaluate. And then the energy over that period, well, it's much better for the LEDs, but it still hasn't reached the point where the LED decision is enough. And however, when you start looking at maintenance, because whether it's 5 years or 20, it's still a big difference, then we don't have to send people out to change all the lights. Remember the old days when they would change all the fluorescent tubes in an office at the same time, and they'd try and do it when people were out, because that was a big deal and you didn't want them flickering in the meantime. So at this point, when you look at this total costs, the LEDs come out ahead. What's interesting to me is the company that actually did this is not renowned, well, it's renowned for selling low-priced items, but here they made a decision to buy something more expensive because it would play out in the end. Unfortunately, not only does this clicker not work, but the LED doesn't work on the screen. The laser doesn't work, rather. So here's the challenge. In the days that this was happening and people were not thinking about the bigger picture, and the buyer gets a order across his desk saying, replace the incandescents in the parking lots, what's likely to happen? He may not be aware of the full picture. He's probably not getting, maybe he's not even getting a bonus on it or something because of saving money. I mean, so although buyers can understand, you need to communicate to the right people. And Gage, I'm going to pick on you because you're the salesman I know in the room. But who would you actually be selling this to?
A lot of times with this type of stuff, I'll go after supply chain management and operations. And if I can show the cost savings, then typically I can pique their interest.
Yep, great, thanks. Now, you can take it too far. I think Microsoft just bored people silly with total cost of ownership, which people didn't necessarily buy, didn't understand. The company, by the way, was Walmart, and it was written up in the Business Journal in Portland. So not necessarily the one you would think of as the highest or most likely to spend more money. Now, a lot of times when I talk about pricing, help people, they say, well, okay, This is all right for physical products, but does it apply to services? And I would say it does. And here's sort of more of a theoretical, but with some actual overtones. Think about a mechanic, a body shop that's willing to spend more money on equipment, much like Tim Cook said, or the one that you're using today for very likely. For the cost-based per hour pricing, it's kind of safe for the seller, right? Safe. They know what it's going to be. In many cases, they've got they're working off a set rate that the insurance companies, etc., tell them. The profits are fixed by the hourly rate, and they're driven by the time taken, which are correlated. And what if you spent more money on equipment and were able to do things differently? It's risky, at least to start with, for the seller, but it can yield higher profits if you've got people trained up and you can do fixed price still. Maybe they can do more jobs per day. This and the following set of research and examples are being done in the professional world as well, where lawyers are moving more towards fixed price. But in the mechanics, contractors, I don't know how much is really happening. This is important. Don't trust the salespeople. Sorry, Gage. The person that comes to you and says, we're charging too much because price is really important to our customers. For professional services, they are often wrong. This work came from a group called Hinge Marketing, and the one I'm focusing on most is the technology, where the biggest difference was seen. Buyers and sellers were asked to comment on what was the most important thing. And you can see that the seller, in this case, either the salesperson or how they communicated to the company, they thought it was 54% of them thought that was the most important, whereas only 8% of the purchasers thought that was the most important. The most important thing, and this is technology services, was for the buyers, team expertise and skills, and then the reputation, etc., etc. So it was quite a way down before we got to cost and terms. You may not believe this, so you might think I just have to. I don't know. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid or whatever, and I really can't sustain that. But it's true across the board with different services. It's least true in accounting and financial services. After all, they're selling services that are around counting beans anyway. But it's still 2-to-1 and more in favor of the the buyer thinking that it's backwards. Oh yeah, the buyer thinking it's less important than the seller. And the third one, I think, was management consulting. Yeah. Any comments on that?
Trista commented she's doing value-based pricing for consulting. So that fits, I think, with your schematic.
Yeah, I am definitely seeing more lawyers doing this, and some CPAs. Not sure about consultants, and I have sort of mixed feelings about what's going on with web developers and things like that.
So just to be clear, this is true for services and not goods?
Yes. That's a good point. This was the research was done around professional services. I think some of it is still true in the physical or the different kinds of services world, but it's less easy to describe and to see that big difference. Good question.
So I guess the complexity comes in pricing items that are XYZ as a service, where you are actually delivering a good as a service, or a software product. But from the consumer's point of view, it is a service.
You're building up the points here, I think. Yeah, I think that's fair. But when you look at it in terms of what they actually accomplish, it might be easiest to think about the that and the time that Microsoft sort of did a number on that whole total cost of ownership thing has long gone now. So maybe it's a little easier. But if we ask people, and we're just about to get to the research section, if we ask people what's important to them in whatever realm, whether it's products or services, we can understand that, and then we can do some more deep analysis about what drives their view of the value that you are offering or proposing. Okay. Last, I'm going to skip forward on some slides after this next one. The value doesn't have to be physical. Now, I think there's a mix here of established companies and just getting started. So you have to sort of think about some of these things in different ways and act differently. This is going to be a question as well. So we got two different ways of buying acetaminophen: in a branded product from Tylenol, or as a generic that's just marked acetaminophen. And I've sort of done it in a different order here. I'm going to ask you the question. No, actually, I'll ask you the question first. Hands up, who would buy the branded product, the Tylenol? You got that, Elizabeth? Yeah.
I'm muted, but
Yeah.
I think I've got 6, 7.
Okay.
7.
Okay. And the generic.
So put your hands down, the folks who were.
Yeah, put.
1, 2,
Okay.
3, 4. Are you re-voting, John? 5, 6.
Okay.
Okay, 6.
So anybody thought about the difference in price? 3.5 times as much for the branded product. What do physicians buy? Generally, unless you've told them otherwise, and it depends on your relationship with them on what they think you want, but generally they will buy generics because they know that medically, barring unforeseen incidents, which can also happen to the branded products, they are the same product. And I mean, obviously the incidents can involve things like fakes and transferring across countries and things like that. So there's a significant boost. This is really the point I want to get to here. There's a significant boost in the price they can charge. That's the pricing power that Warren Buffett referred to. Significant boost in a branded product. Now, what does that say to you as a somebody just entering the market? It might fill you with chagrin, right? You might say, no, that's terrible. I can't hope to compete with that. It says some things about how you introduce something, and that you have to differentiate, because after all, this is pretty much a commodity, other than what's happened is the company that started it out has tried to keep their hold on it. And by the way, these days I would include in the branded, I would include sort of store brands and brands like Kirkland, because people have some sort of association with that. So you're just going up against the big guys if you're somebody new trying to compete in that essentially commodity market. Find other ways to get over it by not falling into, by going for additional values. Okay. I'm going to skip through most of these next slides, just stop at a couple of them. They're about some research that we were asking people about how they value different parts of a product. And one thing I'll just say is when we get to the pricing questions, we're usually over halfway through a survey. So these are typically the things that we might want to look at. And one of the things I'm going to show you is just looking at some of the big picture stuff. So we'll get over this. If you haven't read Blue Ocean Strategy, it's a good way of looking at how people take things don't value, take out things that aren't valued. Big picture issues. Michael's picture was on the screen a moment ago. He looks at some information from NOAA predicting what was going to happen around climate change, and that gave them the start for setting up their business, or at least the part of it they was talking to me about in what he shared. There's other big picture things like the demographics, and of course right now COVID, just in economics in general. Don't ignore those things. Stay in touch with that. If it makes sense for your surveying, then we'll get some of this demographic information for a start, and deliver the features customers want by finding out from them what they are. And I'll just go into that in a little bit more detail. If you supply features that they want, it's going to be less expensive and it's more likely to sell. The development engineers will often tell you that this extra thing they want to throw in is free. It's not. And once people start using it, it's going to cost more in support. And this does have some application to selling around the world. Different, it's why people typically would start in one part of the world and then move to another, which I think is particularly applicable to medical. Okay. Ultimately, though, and it's a pity Buzz isn't here, because I was going to say this is something he ought to be looking at for the question he was asking. If you can segment the market, do it in a good way rather than just making up personas, then you've got a better idea of whether you can do differentiated pricing. Okay. Now,
so Mike, one of the questions that we've had
okay.
is, at no point did you mention the factor of quality, perceived or actual, as it impacts on the equity. That I'll quote, quality remains long after the price has been forgotten. So can you speak a little bit about that as you go forward? And you maybe
I can, and it actually is probably a good lead into this next section as well.
I thought so.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned the pre-mixed concrete, and I'm not sure this is a good example, but I just kind of got it in my mind. But there are differences there, and in some of it you can't really tell until later, right? You buy something like that, and you don't know until years later that it was a bad idea. Some of these things we can ask directly. Some of them we can't. I won't step back to it, but I stepped over a piece where I wrote about, I criticized Cooks Illustrated for their reviews of Dutch ovens. And the one that they recommended, they said in the course of testing, we chipped it twice. And it wasn't a bad price. Maybe it was an okay price to give somebody else. I don't know. But I have Cuisinart, which was their top ranked, and it costs 3 or 4 times as much. So for me, that's important. That longevity is important. I have a kind of side story. I did some work on jewelry for a large online company locally, and their contention was that people were feeling put off by going into a jewelry store because they were being made to feel that they couldn't afford it or something like that. That's not really that relevant. But this one person said, I buy the real stuff for me and I buy knockoffs for my friends because they won't appreciate it. I don't know what sort of friend that is. If you're buying for you think it's a starter marriage, maybe, but it was pretty shocking. So does that get to part of it, Elizabeth?
I am surprised about the starter marriage comment. So you got me.
Well, I've only thought about that later, but it was certainly something. Well, let's see what you think after we get into this. So, pricing. One of the reasons that pricing is felt by startups to be difficult is that we don't know how to ask the right questions, and the market research community has long made that difficult. And in fact, then also there's people that come out of Microsoft and are have some idea, especially if they were only just on the edge of some research, where there's a lot being spent on research and it's not necessarily turning into anything useful. You can ask people about price. There is the alternative to the way that I'm going to describe. The major alternative is around a thing called conjoint analysis. And this is where you don't know enough about the components of a product, and you just have to look and say, oh, let me see, it's got 2 doors or 4 doors, the engine's like this, the brakes are like that, and now I've got to weigh that against everything else. You can't see it on my blurred picture if you can even see me, but I just bought a used tractor, and it's very hard to okay. I don't know what you've got on your screen. Well, behind me is this used tractor. It's very difficult to see the to check prices on that kind of stuff. They're all over the map. But I will tell you that this is not a quality thing. But when somebody wrote an article about the tractors to avoid, they said they had a list of 4, and then they said number 5, that's everything else that isn't green, John Deere, orange, Kubota, or maybe red, Massey Ferguson, because those things keep their value up, and they do that because of they will last forever. Okay, let's get back to the
we're not
pricing.
seeing your tractor. In fact, actually, at the moment, we're not seeing you.
Not seeing any video. Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Just your
did
name.
I stop it? Yeah. I didn't know you were, but anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I thought I did. No, it's not.
I'm sorry
it doesn't. Oh, it doesn't want to do it. Okay. Who's that?
Okay.
This is Bodo. I'm sorry. I'm the one who asked the question about quality. I want to maybe narrow it down slightly. In my previous role, I was actually at Microsoft working on pricing for API services, especially within AI and computer vision. And we did a lot of pricing studies. However informative they were, we happened to know at the time that our computer vision APIs or services were better than the competition by a lot. At least for a while they were. So ultimately that became the one factor that determined why our price was higher than everyone else, because we knew that whichever developer, whichever company was going to make a choice between which computer vision they were going to use, they were certainly going to choose quality over price. And so that became a factor there. I just wanted to ask, while this applies to, okay, we happen to know very well, so it was an actual quality advantage. What about the fact that most of the time is actually just a perceived quality? Does that play into it, and does it apply to everything?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of complex area, and I don't want to sidestep the question, but I think I should at least move forward to just see what you think about the quality aspects of what I'm going to show you. I mean, if you're somebody who buys a Toyota versus a Lexus, a lot of the things behind the behind what you see are the same. Does that matter? I think it does matter to some people, and that's where the perceived quality comes in. But I think we should just hold that and maybe pick up the conversation later if this next section doesn't give you anything to think about. Okay, so we use this technique called the Van Westendorp the price sensitivity model, and it's one reason it's good for. Well, there's a couple of reasons it's good for startups. It's easy, and easy means that you don't have to pay as much for sample. It's something that you can use in focus groups in small numbers as well as for large quantitative studies. The results will be less refined. You can't necessarily do as much subgrouping, but those are two valuable things. The other thing is it's easy to understand for both the survey taker and the person looking at it, and as an investor or the board or something. Before I still do some conjoint, but I ran into a lot of situations where the researcher couldn't understand it well enough to explain to the management. So it was kind of difficult, and then we were just, ended up paying more to get that done. So Microsoft has the deeper pockets. They could choose which was the appropriate technique. But I think this is a good fit for most startups. Okay. So we ask, these are the short forms of the questions. We ask them at what price it would be a bargain, and then we ask them, at what price would it be getting expensive, but you'd still consider it? Maybe you throw quality in there, well, not in terms of these questions, but in terms of what their other responses are. And a lot of times we're doing this early on, so the product is a little less formulated, or the training hasn't been done, etc. But those are two sort of boundary things, and we'll see how the analysis works out in the end. At what price is it just too expensive to consider? I don't care what's in it, but I can't afford that. That's out of my budget. And then this last question is where I think the quality does fit. At what price is it too cheap? We usually use too inexpensive when we're actually asking people. Now, what does too cheap mean? It means that you're getting a website from somebody who is still doing their training and is not putting their name behind it, will not fix it, or maybe they say they will, but you don't really think they will. And sometimes people are surprised to think that this idea of too cheap exists. I mean, after all, everybody's trying to get a better deal, right? It exists less in the world of just pure software and apps, things like that, rather than enterprise software where you're talking about a whole team behind it. What are we doing on time? Around 15. Okay. But the fact is it exists. This is you'll get the link to this. This is the Foundation article. And then we do the analysis. Peter van Westendorp was the head of the, I think he was head of ESOMAR, certainly the very high in the Dutch market research community. And this has been around for a long time. And it turns out that sometimes market researchers suggest, because they want to see if you will take them up on it, they suggest conjoint, and then they end up doing Van Westendorp. What we do is we plot the cumulative percentages of responses at the numbers that they give us. And these are open-ended questions. So unlike some of the other techniques which can be considered to be negotiation rather than finding out real things, we're going to ask them as far as possible for open-ended responses. We might frame it a little bit by saying beforehand, a certain product in this same category costs such and such. That's a dangerous thing, but we will sometimes be persuaded to do that. And we get these 4 charts, and you'll notice that 2 of them have the valence, the term, the plus and minus part reversed. So there's 2 expensive, 2 cheap, and then the 2 that are reversed are not a bargain and not expensive. This was one of the brilliant parts of Van Westendorp's creation of this tool. And as far as I know, I mean, you can do some work directly out of Excel, but most people like to see the graphical analysis of it. And what we get from that is information about these 4 intersections, but I think only 2 of them are really valuable. The others are sort of just like adding something that's not necessarily as useful. The range of acceptable prices, which is the intersection between the 2 cheap and not a bargain, and the not expensive and too expensive. Those are the key things. You can see this is fairly wide in this particular study, from about $9 to just over 20. But that's typically the case. And you'll see when we do the add-on that there's some more information to be had from that. I think the first time I presented this in public was to a group of engineers who just left Hewlett Packard down in Corvallis, and I wish you could either see me or maybe I can. I don't know if I can do it on here. No. Oh yeah. Yeah, I got the mouse point up there. Anyway, between the intersection between the purple and the green, between the 2 cheap and the 2 expensive, one of the engineers said, "So that's the price, right?" And I said, "No, that's it's in the middle of this range. Don't just be confused by it. It does happen to be the point at which price is the least barrier, right? The fewest people say both it's too cheap and that it's too expensive." So before we move on, we don't have enough interaction, but I'd like to see if there's any questions on this particular slide. Okay, and I won't come back to BOGO and the quality piece, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So this is the starting point, and we sort of take that. We can check it against different segmentation. We find out that certain groups of people are shifted. What usually happens is that the lower end does not shift, the upper end shifts by people that are more or less interested. And for instance, when we do super premium dog food, we might find that they're prepared to pay a higher price, and they're also more likely to buy it, right? We've probably done a question ahead of time on what's your interest without price. I want to share a couple of examples before we move on to the second part. We did this for a company introducing a car service in India, and the cost of living was so different between the different cities they were looking at that we had to normalize it and see the difference there between the different places. That was a successful outcome. I think, actually most outcomes are successful even when they tell the entrepreneur that, you know what, I can't make the product at the price that people are willing to pay. To me, that's a success. What's not so much a success is when the company says, oh, well, that's very interesting. And it turns out that they already pre-sold a higher price than this resulted in, and then took it off the market. They pre-sold it to management that they would get this much money. That's kind of sad.
It wasn't a, we had these number of people who had agreed to buy this early on, that kind of pre-sold. This was
no. I realized when I was saying that it could be interpreted. No, they had basically told management that they could sell it. I don't know. It's like $500, and it turned out to be $300. And there was no overlap. So 300 was kind of the center of the range, and then up from there. No, that was. If it was, we've sold it at a certain price, then we might be scratching our heads and thinking, well, let's see. And this is kind of where John and I have vigorous conversations. Well, who are these people? And we've done some situations where the company thought that the price they were going to achieve, the other consultants and me were thinking this was a annual contract, and the company thought it was a monthly contract. And you can imagine what happened with that. What it ended up was they segmented lower and found a group that was going to pay the higher price. So we can filter these charts in those kinds of ways.
And that's what if you look at this range from $9 to just $20, it's quite a big range. So how would you, is that where you're talking about you could sub-segment the market? Some section of the market is willing to pay between 9 and, I don't know, 13, and the others will pay in the middle.
Yes, that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the other side of it is the next thing I want to show you. And unfortunately, I'm very delinquent in writing this article, is when we do demand and revenue modeling. So we already asked them before this what their interest was without pricing being involved, and we would filter on that, and then we asked them to get more serious. How likely are you to buy at the specific prices that they individually gave us within whatever the appropriate window is? If it's a new refrigerator, it's not going to be the next 6 months. If it's some sort of, if it's like a renewal for a piece of software, it might be in the next time you renew it, which is going to be within a year or something. And this is what's called a fully anchored Likert scale. We use words, but we turn it into numbers. And the last thing that we do is we don't believe them completely. We have 70% of the ones that say very likely, 50% that say somewhat likely. This is our starting point. Sometimes we'll be negotiating with the client on the actual values to put in there. And then we ignore everybody else. That's upside. That's gravy. And one of the reasons for that is that by this time in the survey, they've probably been getting excited about the product, and they're going to be over optimistic. And then push comes to shove and something is released. They're not necessarily the same feeling, and it might not be quite the same as we were describing, because that's what happens at the end. Then this is a different project, and there's 2 scales here. And by the way, some people would ask more than one question. We think one is okay, and it's by this time they probably had enough. So the left is essentially market share, demand. And you can see there's 2 peaks there. Typically, we're using indexing because we don't have enough information about cost, and this makes it consistent. And then I've got this gray area. Once we get past the range by a certain amount, we're in the here be dragons territory. So we kind of just caution people not to be paying too much attention to that. And typically, we know what the maximum volume is, but here we've got the maximum revenue is at a higher price point. That's why that range comes in, Elizabeth. Why? Because that would be within the range of acceptable prices. So why is that? It's because everybody who's answering questions about price, their bargain and getting expensive numbers are going to be different. And for somebody, what a bargain is might be too expensive for somebody else, or past, in the getting expensive region. So that's why these don't line up exactly. I want to make sure that people understand that. This doesn't always happen as neatly as this, where it's pretty obvious you can sell less and make more money. More often it's decisions, right? And sometimes it's, well, can we make the product that these people think they want as fast, or do we get out there with something that's simpler? Questions on that? Okay.
Can you see the chat?
Well, I can see that there's 76, so I don't know if I'm presumably missing a whole bunch of them, but well, I can see the last couple. Oh, that's you, about the maturity model into the cash flow pro forma. Yeah, I think so. I don't see why not. Is there any others that you wanted to?
So the
bring my
normal
attention to?
thing for startups to do is they do the 3X thing and forget about the fact that they have a price for distributors that they need to figure out. And then they take and they grab their spreadsheet column and they drag it out for 5 years and have 60 columns, but they don't create a maturity model on the pricing at all. And so you're helping them find a price for now from the people that you've interviewed. How do you take the price for next quarter, next year into your financial models? And then
Well, there's 2 answers to that, I think, or at least.
No.
One is I really just went pretty much straight past a lot of that discussion about models for financials, including unit economics, which you think is going to change, right? So you've probably got that baked in, and then you can bake in some price reductions or new versions, etc. And one of the classic models that isn't the unit economic one is where each product in the portfolio, or the single product that's being taken over, is going to have a life cycle. So yes, this is a snapshot. We can look at the future and predict that there's going to be new entrants. We're going to replace it with our own product, those kinds of things. But it's a snapshot, yes. Does that cover enough for now?
You want to talk a little bit about how you would expect this pricing point on these graphs to change over time?
Whoops, sorry. You know, I'm trying to get rid of a screen here. Yeah, I would. Well, just throughout, and we only touched on it very briefly. We're not talking about luxury goods. So luxury goods have their own characteristics, and we're talking about things that one way or another there's value involved, that isn't just directed by price. Somebody mentioned one of the questions about signaling by price, and that's fair, but that isn't the same as luxury. I would, however, expect that these. Let me get rid of this chat window. There. Okay. So I would expect that the prices would decline, but they would also be, if we refine the features, then we might be able to charge more money. This range might decrease as well over time. And, you know, we sort of just ignore the people at the right, because they're usually not thinking. This is one of the beauties of this tool, that it does automatically exclude them. But I would expect that the more interested would cause it to move up. If this is not currently a product on the market, if it's a new category, it would move down, because we've got the effect of price skimming coming in. And then these numbers for demand and revenue indexed, would be affected by competition and by our own cannibalization and competition as well. That makes sense? I know that's a general answer, John, but
I'm mostly trying to help people get some sense of what equation they should apply in their pro forma, but that helps. You know, you'd expect the price to go down. You'd expect a point at which you get competitors come in that will reduce your market, and then you have to be strategic about some of those early on. Yeah.
If you generalize things and take out sort of cases like, you know, the pharma and trying to patent something new and then just move it to something else for a small difference. But if you look in, I mean, maybe consumer electronics is not a bad way of thinking about it, where you know, Apple's playing this. It's not a game, but they are bringing in new models with more features at higher prices, and then the older ones are still available for a period. So that there's a whole sort of section that we're not going to cover, talk at all about, of portfolio management, but that's into play there. The other thing, let's see, where are we on time? Okay. I want to just briefly talk about a few things that the price is not the money you're getting. And there's two different areas and a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's got to do with distribution. This is just kind of a flag these things and think about how they apply to your situation. As far as possible, as an entrepreneur, think about them so that you're not deluded into believing that the price you laid out there is really what you're getting. There's a couple of things, at least, that happen between the list price and the invoice price. And order size discount is common. Whoops. And competitive discount. Competitive discount's kind of a bit of a head fake that, you know, tell the salesperson that you've got a real competitor out there and they'll give you some money off. And whether you really intended it or not, you're a good poker player. So we ended up with just 22 cents out of $6 being reduced at this point. This is some work that came out of Nagel's group, and it's good to look at the concepts behind it and then see how they apply to yours. The second piece is what you might call leakages. We actually invoiced this person, but then we didn't get that much money in. And these are bigger blocks, you'll see. And we finally get down to the pocket price, which is 75% of the list price. These days, most people, and I don't know why it's the smallest here, aren't charging for shipping over a certain rate. But there's, there's a whole set of factors about continuing buying and all of those things. But then there's the payment terms at the other end of this. We'll actually charge you less. We'll give you a discount if you pay on time. Used to be not too long ago that people would take the discount and still not pay on time. So it still happens. Anyway, that's probably just enough to put in here. Okay, the last thing I want to cover this in, I think, the last thing in real concrete is how about increasing prices? Some of you have got existing products out there. How can you increase prices? There's actually some other information on the website about some of this, but this is an experience I just had with my favorite vendor. I have a maintenance contract, and I received this year's with a 25% increase and no explanation. I actually, the rest of this communication until the last part, I didn't say I was just doing this class, but then I did explain to the VP, or executive vice president. The response I got back from the person who sent me the invoice was, we haven't raised prices for 10 years and pricing is on the website. Then I talked to the senior person, and this is what she told me. Our suppliers raise prices 5 to 10% annually without explanation. We tried to avoid regular or frequent price increases. That part is kind of interesting, and it's got pros and cons around it. But then she said one of our loyal customers told me that he was glad we'd caught up with the cost of living. And I think that speaks to the partnership between good vendors and the people who rely on their products. So they want their companies to stay in business. And then when I prompted her, she said moving people to work at home was a significant cost. What do people think about that? What did they do right? What could have been improved? I'm trying to think of somebody who's got an existing product.
It seems like they did bad customer service in my mind. I mean,
yeah.
They could have set the frame up so that they added a bonus and told you about the bonuses that were coming in and made it a sweet deal. So you thought you were getting a great deal, but instead they just whacked you on the head and then said, "Put," So
yeah, I think the fact that
failed on customer interaction.
Yeah, communication was poor in my mind, and I told the woman that. I mean, I was trying earlier on to get a consulting engagement, but the people, 2 or 3 of the names she mentioned of the big companies that were doing it to them, I don't think that's an excuse. They're a smaller company, and if IBM's behaving badly, it doesn't mean you should too. I want to just speak a little bit more about this regular or frequent price increases thing. You would condition people to something if you had a regular price increase that could be smaller. I mean, 5% compounded annually for 10 years, that's more than their 25%. On the other hand, there are some traps there for salespeople who've kind of grandfathered in things. So I don't think it's an easy thing. I think the communication is very simple. They should have done a better job. Okay. And we've got a few minutes. Does anybody, hands up, have freemium in their products? They're giving away apps and ad supported, and then trying to convert to paid products. Anybody said yes?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll just well, I'll run through this. Here's a lot of people have been asking me this in the past, and this is typically what happens. You know, it's ad supported, it's got limited capabilities. You hope people will convert. There are some risks, and it's kind of parallel to the comment back from the company when we did some research around converting totally from free to paid. People said, "I'm glad you asked the question." Okay, because we wanted you to be around. So I can skip through this and we can just get to the last. The last couple of slides are my favorite place in Washington.
Oh, mine too.
Well, I think Meta Valley has done a great job of pricing in general, and the freemium thing that they've done is very interesting too. It's a destination, even more so in the winter. What's happened here, and this is probably something that more people should think about in general, is there's this virtuous cycle of they've got the businesses involved, and they increase participation. They get people to stay longer with some of the techniques they use, and because of these passes, it improves their cash flow to be able to understand what's there so they can plow at the right time. Okay, and the second part of this is, I was getting there before. Oh, okay. Is it a discount or a loyalty program? Does it matter? I don't think so. Last time I was there, they were doing more with, actually they were doing more with fat tire bikes, but they were also doing more with this frame that I could very clearly identify as freemium. There's this particular area there where it's isolated from everywhere else, and they made it free for anybody, including dogs, and dogs don't get to go free in other parts. So it's more likely to be used for people who haven't done cross-country skiing before, and if you want to take your dog, etc., it's great. So I'd be interested to know what you think about that article, Elizabeth. Okay, so we're pretty much done. I've just got the wrap up here. Oh, and you're going to see that, but Elizabeth, have you tallied the numbers?
In terms of participation, we had really early strong strength from Jenna in terms of participation.
Okay. Well, you should probably take it offline, but because of the next slide, and I'll see if my friend has got anything for me. So what I usually do at these workshops is I make an offer, a discount of pricing consulting. And I should point out, which is not very clear from what was said earlier necessarily, you've got to be careful that a discount doesn't turn into lowering prices. And I've just got some things over the last couple of days that I want to mull on and publish. So that's the price for this engagement. And my friend concurs that we're going to give the free, we're going to make this free for Jenna. Okay. Jenna, you have this opportunity. I didn't want it to be an investor, so I was going to ask an investor to give it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. You can get the slides at this link by filling out the evaluation, because we really do want honest feedback, and I'll just leave this last part up so we're not confused by the offer. It's the same QR code and the same link. And if we've got more questions, I think we've still got a few minutes, but I wanted to be sure that everybody got a chance to get out of here on time. So open it up for questions, and actually ask Bogo, if I got his name right, whether he got any more information from this on quality.
Hey, I can ask a
Bogo,
question if.
go ahead, Anu.
Okay, so at some point in time in your slide deck, there was a slide where you showed like 2 pain pills. One was Tylenol, and the other one was like a generic brand. Now I kind of looked at that as a, me as a startup versus competing versus some big mammoths that we are competing with. And I thought if I price myself lower, people may come and evaluate me because I'm priced at a lower price point, obviously. But if I said that, you know what, I'm going to price myself same level as Tylenol, would there be people who would be thinking that this is worth a shot? Because sometimes price is, equated as quality and that can be a useful,
It's a good question, Anu. I actually want to turn you to a different slide as well. I'm trying to think which one it is now, but and it's not just in the questions. You're right. There's a challenge for new entrants. There's also some information on a slide I didn't include, and that's where we did an exercise to ask people about what would they pay for a online backup service, and the end part was we revealed. Well, no, actually, we said, would it make a difference if it's from Amazon or from the name of this company that had the offer? And this was just a theoretical example. We've run it in classes. So I think that's a way that you can get at some of that stuff. Are you willing to take a chance? And there are people, if you're in the different part of the technology adoption curve, if you're an early adopter and find out how to weed out the others, then they might take a chance on you. The Tylenol and generic is a little bit too misleading because it gets into the brand and the power there. So I think having somebody take a chance is good. But you also want to look at the pricing direct results as well without asking them that sort of final follow-up about who it's from. Does that make a difference? Of if there's people out there that understand that too cheap is important. And I don't think I've ever run into a case where it wasn't, except when we evaluated some data that somebody else gave us and they'd asked the questions all wrong. So generally people do understand that too cheap is relevant and to be avoided. Now, and Alexandra, I don't know if you were on early when she was talking about that, big difference in price because their product actually comes from Russia. Big difference in their cost. But that shouldn't necessarily dictate what the price should be. In fact, it really shouldn't. Now, there's some price signaling in some areas where, actually, there is one other point I want to raise about one of the earlier slides. And I'll just step back to that. But price signaling is common in wine, where the cheaper wine might be just as good, but people want to, by charging more, they think it works out better. Sorry for the laborious way there. So just you need to be aware of the market and what is common in that market. And if it's a totally new market, the chances are it really isn't, but it's somebody doing finding a different way to do something that people have already done in different ways. So that's what you need when the things get more complicated, the analogies. The point I forgot to make earlier was, does anybody know why these steep changes in the curves are occurring? Okay.
Because that's where you're taking the measurements.
No, we're not taking the measurement. We asked them to give the number themselves. Okay. There's two reasons for it. One is in consumer world and the other one is in business. And are you more likely to buy something at $9.99 than $10.01? Yes, you are. That's the consumer world. So that's these big shifts. Now we can smooth the curves out, but I wanted to show you the real data. And it does show you that people think at this point, they think at $10, that's one, and another one at $20. The other thing that I don't know what the percentage is that are selling to businesses, and this is equally important. I mean, that's pretty easy, except, you know, some family member is going to say you paid $20 and somebody says, no, I just paid $19.99. Well, whatever. But in the business world, people have authorization points. They have price points that they're able to sign off at, and they're more likely to be in the thousands than the dollars. So you'll see that effect there, and that has some impact on who you talk to, but it also has real impact on what you charge. And in some cases, it gets a little confusing where you have to navigate the fact that two departments who've got smaller budgets each put it together and agreed to share it. And sometimes you wonder whether you're getting in trouble by putting something together to allow them to do that. I haven't run into a problem. I've run into that as a situation. But, does anybody have an experience of that in those doing enterprise sales? Those price points that people want to pay?
I certainly had that at work where we had different authorization and it required a higher level of convincing if the price was above the certain capital limit. There is a question from Trista that says, I'm currently considering whether to do an all-you-can-eat monthly recurring revenue model versus a bulk purchase model versus a pay-for-what-you-use model. Can you, in your schematics, can that help to tease out what you might do with that thinking?
I'm not sure I can give you a sort of off the cuff much of an answer. I would probably try. We've done these models or these tests. The most I've usually done them is twice. Sometimes people have wanted to do them 3 times, and when they've wanted to add on things, we've done that as a separate exercise. But you could, if you've got enough sample, do some A/B testing on it. That would be another way to do it. I'm trying to think. You know, the other way you could do it is, and this actually is perhaps more of a fit, is do some work up front in the research that says, if the price is right, which of these models would you prefer? And we did something like that pretty recently. And then you feed them into parallel questions around the pricing for those particular things. Now, if you want to get to a single model and you don't want to sell multiple ways to different people, that's only going to get you part of the way there. You might be cautious about doing it, but it would, if in fact, one of the things in this project, now I'm remembering it a bit better, was we had some questions from the executive team about a very different model than we were thinking they wanted. And most of the team said, no, that's not going to work. So we didn't exactly make it completely equal. I think Jenna just nodded her head and said, oh, no, she's not. That's just an icon. It's just my eyes. But so there are ways to do it, but it takes a little bit of thinking. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I would say that we have run up against our closing time, and there's been a number of comments in the chats, really enjoying this, have to drop off to something else. But I do want to say thank you on behalf of John and our audience on joining us today. I've really appreciated your thoughts on this. I know you said that the slides would be available. I wanted to tell people, if you were trying that link that Greg put in, it does work. Actually, it just takes a little bit of time for it to load. So please feel free to give that evaluation for the session for today. And
yeah, let me just interrupt there. The final step when you get the download, it might make you think that it's not actually working, but it's because of all these slides.
Okay, that's perfect then. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I've looked forward to meeting you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for putting it on. And I'm part of the virtual tech startups group. So some of these questions about how to find the right people and how to ask them these kind of questions come up there. So feel free to join that.